son, Daniel.
Drool.
Yeah, drool. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming out. We are here with the one and only Daniel Glass. Thank you so much for coming.
Great to be here.
Buddy.
Great to be at Drumeo, man.
Yeah, absolutely. You're always welcome here, by the way.
Thank you. It's been known about you guys for a long time, and really happy that I could be here to bring my brand of insanity.
Dude, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
And we have a really cool lesson planned for you guys today. We have some really cool graphics Dan's going to show on screen, some cool play-alongs like the one he just did there. That's Viva Las Vegas, a different rendition of it that you guys did.
Yeah, that's my band that I was a part of for 19 years, Royal Crown Revue.
Okay, yeah.
People probably know us from the movie The Mask, the Jim Carrey movie.
That's right.
We were around for quite a long time, and we're on Warner Brothers for a long time, so we kind of play classic style music. You might look at me and say, that guy looks a little classic. So
yeah.
That's definitely going to be the topic of what we're going to be talking about in the lesson.
Well, I'm definitely underdressed, man. You definitely just killed it here. I feel like an idiot with my t-shirt on. But anyway, it's going to be a fun lesson. The topic is the evolution of drum kit independence, but it's not so much about independence. It's also more about timekeeping.
Yes.
I guess, and we'll get to that obviously in a little bit here. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And if you want, you guys can follow Daniel Glass online, his website, danielglass.com. And from there, you can find his Twitter, you can find his Facebook, his Instagram, and all that kind of stuff. You've been focusing a lot on teaching right now. You do Skype lessons, you do a lot of clinics and stuff like that. So you're keeping busy.
Absolutely, and I just had a new DVD come out earlier this year, which is called From Ragtime to Rock, an introduction to 100 years of American popular music.
Awesome.
And, yep, basically, I being in the band that I was in, Royal Crown Revue, I've worked with the Brian Setzer Orchestra, Bette Midler, we did some stuff with Gene Simmons, and everything that, or not everything, but a lot of what I'm about as a player has been exploring traditional styles of American music. And what I do as an educator and a teacher, not only as a clinician, but also as a private teacher, is I bring all that together and show people and teach people about drums with kind of a historical bent, with the idea of if you know more about where you came from, it will make you better at what you do today.
Absolutely.
So it offers a lot of big picture stuff, and that's what we're going to kind of jump in here.
Well, you're becoming known for that kind of style of teaching, and that's why I'm really pumped for this lesson here. We've never done anything like this before, especially with the graphics that you're going to show, so it's going to be really cool. Also, this is the first time we've had a left-handed drummer with a left-handed kit set up here, so
yes.
For a live lesson, that is. So very, very cool. And I'm on the other side, so I feel a little bit awkward, so if I look awkward, guys, I apologize. But we also want to thank your sponsors for helping bring you out here. DW Drums, obviously. Sonar and Crescent Cymbals.
Sabian and Crescent.
Sorry, I said Sonar, Sabian. Yeah, Sonar doesn't make cymbals. DW Drums, Aquarian Heads, Vic First Sticks, LP Percussion, and even Head Armor Cases as well.
Head Armor Cases, yes.
So thank you for helping make this happen.
Yes.
And also, if you guys are new here, if this is your first time watching, maybe you signed up because you're following Daniel on his social media and all that kind of stuff. Welcome to Drumeo Edge. We do this kind of stuff every day. Obviously, Monday events are free for everyone, but every day we go live. And if you like what you see here, you can always try it out. Go to drumeo.com/trial. You can get yourself a free 30-day trial for Drumeo Edge. And so I'll give it to you, man. We were talking about the evolution of drum kit independence or timekeeping. Take it away.
Okay. So essentially, in my teaching, in my look at American music, and I like to talk about American music, and what I mean by American music is American popular music.
Okay.
And what's so cool about that is that America's popular music, going all the way back to the time of, say, ragtime in the 1890s, all the way up through, say, hip-hop today, has always ended up becoming the world's popular music. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of a trip, Mm-hmm. And why is that? Well, yeah, America has a good marketing machine. We're good at marketing stuff.
Yeah.
And, we won a couple wars, so, we kind of broadcast our stuff there. But it's because people like the way the music feels. And in teaching and looking at all this stuff, I kind of started to dig in deeper and deeper and try to say, well, what is it about the way the music feels that has made it so popular? And so what I've really come across is this idea of pulse. Mm-hmm. The way, and pulse just generally means tapping our feet. When you hear a cool song and you're just tapping along, that's the pulse, essentially. But it's the way that American music feels. And there's some sort of common themes that run through a lot of different styles of American music. So we think about ragtime or early jazz, New Orleans style jazz, or big band music of the 1930s, bebop of the 40s, rhythm and blues, rock and roll of the 50s and 60s, funk, soul, hip hop, R&B. It always has this pulse going on with it.
Yeah.
So what I want to do today is talk about that
Okay.
pulse, and I'm going to talk about the role of our four limbs in a couple of different types of situations, and then I'm going to just show how pulse has evolved. And the reason why I talk about these things, why it might be important for the viewers, because it's like, well, I'm a drummer here in 2015. Why do I need to know about what they did in New Orleans back in the day? Well, you know, the idea is that if you can tap into some of this idea of pulse or have that in your mind when you're doing the more modern stuff that you do, it's going to flavor what you do. It's going to help inform what you do to make it more, to make you a better drummer, to give you a better pocket, you know, because you say, oh, well, I'm following in the tradition that I came from. I'm not just learning a groove or learning a lick, you know, I'm actually creating this American music feel.
Gotcha.
So,
makes sense,
yeah, so let's go to the PowerPoint. And we talk about the quarter note pulse and the role of the four limbs. So where did the quarter note pulse come from? So I'm going to give everybody a little history lesson here, and then we'll get to more playing. And don't worry, there'll be lots of pictures, so it won't just be me talking.
Okay,
so where did the quarter note pulse come from? Well, the quarter note pulse really established itself during the big band era of the 1930s. And the reason that it did so is because of the evolution, essentially, of the upright bass. Now, prior to that time, you had jazz, but the jazz bands usually had a tuba player, which went back to the days of marching music, because that's where jazz comes from, brass band, right? And the tuba player had to breathe, as tuba players do.
Of course.
So they would generally play what we call the two-feel. Pum, 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 pum. So this is kind of back and forth and a little bit more staccato. Well, in the 1930s, as jazz evolved, the upright bass, which had always been around, really established itself. And where it established itself, and here's a big band that I'm showing here, and probably a lot of you will recognize this big band, the big band of Count Basie. Now, when the upright bass came in, he didn't have to breathe in order to play. So he could just go thum dum ding dong ding boom ding bang boom ding dong. And what they realized with this sort of ever-flowing cascade of quarter notes, well, guess what? People really like to dance to it, okay? And this is a theme, if you've ever seen any of my clinics, any of my DVDs, anything I ever do, I talk about the role of the drummer is to make people dance. And by making people dance, I don't just mean like Scooby-Dooby-Doo kind of dancing. I mean making people move and taking a group of people, whether if you think about drums throughout history, if it's a religious ceremony, you're transporting people and getting them all to have a revelatory religious experience. Or if it's the military, you're getting them all to march together down a field. Or if it's a heavy metal concert, you're getting them all to headbang together. Or if it's a swing dance concert, you're getting them to partner dance, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is that our role as drummers is to get people, grab a group of people and move them from A to B, however we do that. So in this case, pulse, okay? Quarter note pulse. And wow, people like to dance to it because it never stopped. Makes sense. So the band that defined the quarter note pulse was the Count Basie band. You know, there were many other great big bands, but I like to focus on it. And now this picture really zooms in on Count Basie's rhythm section.
Okay.
And the rhythm section were so good at creating quarter note pulse that they became known as the All-American Rhythm Section. Like they had their own name. How often does that happen?
Yeah, right.
That you have a rhythm section that has its own name. The only one I've ever been able to think of is Stevie Ray Vaughan, Double Trouble.
Oh, okay.
You know, his rhythm section.
Sure.
I'm sure other people will correct me and be like, you forgot about so-and-so. But
leave it
for now,
below,
so in the Count Basie rhythm section, you had, and I'd just like to name the guys, Count Basie on piano, you could see him on the right, Freddie Green, the guitar player on the left, Walter Page playing bass up behind, and of course the great Joe Jones. Now, let's talk about what they did to create pulse. And by the way, before we get into that too deeply, this is a picture of Freddie Green. And he was with Basie for more than 50 years. So you see Basie on the left in this picture, and Freddie Green was with him for like 50 years, okay? Now, here's the amazing thing. Notice there is a microphone on Freddie Green's guitar. There is no guitar amp, okay? He did not use an amp. And the Count Basie band didn't even get monitors until like 1980, and Basie died in, I think, in 85.
You're kidding.
So these guys knew how to play together. Now, you might say, well, what's the big deal? They didn't use an amp. You know, they didn't have a lot of amplification. Well, let's take a look at another picture. So this is the Palladium, which is a huge ballroom, swing dance ballroom in the swing dance era. This is actually a little later in the 50s, but the big bands are still big.
Oh, wow.
Way in the distance, you can see the big band. But this, if you can imagine, the difficulty that the big bands had is that they had to get a room, say I think there's about 6,000 or 7,000 people in this room. How, as the drummer, do you play that pulse and get 6,000 people dancing without blowing away everybody else on stage? You know, going like like that on your bass drum. Now I just want to show you guys how important the quarter note pulse was. There's a couple pieces of music notation. This is an old chart called Big John Special, and this is what a drum part looked like of 1930s big band music. If you look at it, it's almost all quarter notes, okay? I'll show you another chart. This one here is called Begin the Begin, which is a really famous hit. Artie Shaw Orchestra was his biggest hit. And again, you see all quarter notes. I'm going to go to a chunk of that chart now blown up, and what you'll notice is at letter D, all quarter notes, and again, E, now you have some little rolls happening on beats 2 and 4. So before, and this is sort of the evolutionary part that I'm going to talk about, so before you actually had a ride cymbal to play your time on, right, drummers kept time on their snare drum. And we think, wow, that's kind of weird. How do you keep time on the snare drum? Remember, the hi-hat didn't even show up until around 1930. But jazz started way back in the 19-teens and even before.
Okay, yeah.
So this notation comes from the way that drummers kept time was to play quarter notes here on their snare, and then on 2 and 4 they would play a light press. Okay. So it came from, say, this is military music. Well, now that turned into a drummer, and if you get my DVD, The Century Project, and we could talk about some of that, I go really much more into detail about this. Yeah. But what I want to mention is that from the very beginning, drummers were playing quarter notes, even if the music was going right. So you can feel that 2-beat feel. So this is a kind of an earlier version. So that way of notating drums survived even into the swing era, where now guys would play like this. Now just notice the 4 on the floor bass drum. So boom, 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 instead of. So this is almost kind of a side note, but when you're playing this traditional music and you get a chart like this, I would look at this and go, well, why didn't they write on here? This is, that should be written.
Yeah.
Well, in actuality, you're kind of, once you familiarize yourself with the style, even in the swing era, guys would be here. Right? So a lot of Gene Krupa stuff, people think, Gene Krupa, he was more of a modern player. He played on the snare drum a lot because he came from that world. Okay?
Gotcha.
So that's sort of timekeeping evolution. We're working our way up from playing on the snare drum. The ride cymbal, by the way, didn't show up until the 1940s. So we've been to the teens, they played on the snare drum.
Yeah.
The 20s, they did that. The 30s, the hi-hat showed up, they switched over. That became the popular timekeeping device in the big band era.
Sure.
And then by the beginning of the 40s, guess what brought in the ride cymbal? Beboppers, okay? So they didn't like this really heavy 4 on the floor bass drum. That had been more for dancing. And bebop was like, we need to move jazz away from being a dance music because we're tired of just playing for dance. We want to make it art. So they went from this. So you notice how the whole thing lightened up.
Totally.
And came from this heavy bottom end thing to now this light. So now that's when the ride cymbal showed up. So now that we're caught up on the evolution of timekeeping, as it were, I want to talk about how we as drummers, in what we do, whether we're a jazz drummer, whether we're a rock drummer, usually those kind of are the two traditions that people come from. So I want to address the role of the 4 limbs, okay?
Yeah.
And we start with the most important limb.
Oh, we got that.
Grabbing a pad. The most important limb is the ride cymbal. Now, you might think, well, why is the ride cymbal the most important limb? Well, rock evolved out of jazz. So before there was rock even, there was the idea of jazz. And jazz, again, guys didn't play really hard like that because, and we'll get to why they didn't play hard on the bass drum.
Yeah.
But let's start with the ride cymbal. So this little graphic is what's going to show you what is challenging about playing American music, about capturing this pulse. Because you might say, well, 4 quarter notes, what's the big deal with that? Well, if you think about jazz, which we're talking about right now, what makes jazz so wonderful and so difficult to play. And for those of you who have tried to play jazz or have experimented, maybe try to play a shuffle, it's not that easy, right? You know, most people have a very hard time with jazz. They learn rock first. So what makes jazz difficult is that the feel of the music has forward momentum, because jazz started out as being dance music prior to when bebop came in and it became more art music. So when it was dance music, it had lots of forward momentum, just like every kind of dance music does. It had pulse, okay? Yes. However, most people probably notice that jazz has a very laid-back feel, right? Jazz is never like, you know, nervous. It's not like punk rock or something. So even if you're playing fast, the jazz guy is always, the jazz drummer is always really mellow, keeping it together, right? So that is why jazz was so popular, and why, you know, hip hop is kind of the same. Hip hop makes you dance, but the hip hoppers are always chill. You know, if you think of good rock music, say Journey from the 70s, it's like big and it makes you want to, you know, rock out, but it's got that pocket. You think about guys like Levon Helm, or, you know, it's that pocket, but yet it makes you, it drives forward. So the problem with achieving this is we got to get that going in the ride cymbal. So the way that I do that is using something called the throw-up exercise, okay? Now, stick with me for a second. I know this might seem a little weird, but the idea is that it's broken into two pieces. The throw, which is making everything move forward, right? Driving the time. And then there's the up, which is getting out of the way and allowing the quarter note to happen. Now, I'm gonna go back to this chart, and I wanna show you guys something. If you think about playing jazz, all right, you got a bass player usually on an upright bass, and he does what's called a walking bass line, right, which is playing quarter notes. So he's going dum 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 dim dum dim dum dum, and he's moving his body in a circular motion to play the notes as quarter notes. Now, if you look at the chart, if we were to play on beats 1, 2, 3, and 4, we could play those in example A as quarter notes. We could play them as eighth notes. So beats 1, 2, 3, and 4. We could play them as 16th notes, beats 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, if I'm a bass player, right, the three ways I play that sound different, right? The long notes, dum, 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 dum. If it's an eighth note, shorter, dum, 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 dum. And 16ths would be shorter still, dup, 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 dup. Now, in the sense of jazz, we just talked about, I have to play quarter notes. That's what the music calls for. That's that pulse that we talked about. That's the heart of the music. But if I'm a drummer and I'm playing quarter notes on a cymbal, how do I know if I'm playing quarter notes, eighth notes, or 16th notes, right? And if I'm not playing quarter notes, then I'm not playing with the rest of the band, right? Same thing with the guitar player, like Freddie Green. His body moves junk, 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 junk. So he plays a complete quarter note. So to me, when students come to me, one of the first things I do is we start working on how to generate a true quarter note with what we're doing on the ride cymbal. And we start on the pad. And we do it using this thing called the throw-up exercise.
Throw-up exercise.
The throw-up exercise. And it has nothing to do with regurgitation, but it's, you know, I got your attention, didn't I, right?
Right.
Okay, so I'm not gonna get into the technique too much, but the idea is that we wanna throw the stick and let it bounce back and get out of its way. Now, a lot of people in a lot of different disciplines drumming have different names for this. This is not unique, and I didn't invent this, I just want to say. But what I sometimes have a problem with is that they teach strokes, and notice you're throwing, and then you're getting out of the way, and the stick is coming back up. But it doesn't necessarily get a lot farther than that in terms of, well, I don't play music like this. I play music like I play music. So the idea of throw up is that we put it into a musical scenario where now we want to create consistent quarter notes. Okay? And the idea is that if you look at the tip of my stick, it never stops moving. And basically what I'm doing is creating a long, full, round quarter note through one motion. That includes the throw, so I'm driving forward, I'm making people dance, and I'm getting out of the way and allowing the stick to come up. Now, a lot of guys, when they play drums, or they're going like this. So does that look like a full quarter note to you?
Not even close.
It's choked, right? It's, and sometimes people come to me, jazz players especially, and they say, I studied out of all these books, these independence books, and I've got all these chops, but guys are telling me that it's not swinging. It's not swinging, And to me, what is when, in order to make something swing, you have to access quarter notes. You have to understand and access like a long, full motion. So I like to sing ta, 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 And really, if you look at the motion of the stick, it's consistently moving. It never stops. It's like a wheel, right? So
Yeah.
here's the beginning of the motion. I come down, I strike, I get out of the way, I allow it to come back up, and as soon as we've completed one quarter note, it goes right into the next cycle.
Yeah.
And if you put too much forward momentum into it, you don't have that up. So you don't have that laid back, chill vibe that you have going on in jazz. So let's now take this and put it on a ride cymbal, and we'll just sort of quickly demonstrate what this sounds like and what this feels like.
Okay.
Okay, now may not seem like, I don't know if I can talk and play at the same time, probably.
Yeah, you can. Victor will make sure the audio is
Okay,
good. So.
thank you, Victor. So the idea is, it's just quarter notes. What's the big deal? Well, when you actually try to get this going, it's not so easy. And, you know, especially the reason why I just teach quarter notes and not the full spang, spang-a-lang jazz ride pattern is because now you're going to add a hi-hat, then you're going to add a kick, then you're going to add a snare, then you're going to add a bass player, and a guitar player, and a keyboard player, and a sax player. Then you're going to go into a club, and you're going to add lights and sound and nerves.
Okay.
If you can't play 4 quarter notes, then it's a house of cards, right? So the idea is to get this going for starters very simple, okay? So when students come to me and we start working on this kind of stuff, we work on this a lot because this is it. This is American music wrapped into one move, one motion, right? Okay. Now, in order to practice this, and I don't have the track here because it's a copywritten track.
Okay.
But this on the screen is a guy named Jimmy Cobb. Jimmy Cobb played with Miles Davis, and he played on the very famous album Kind of Blue. Now, most people, most drummers in the world have had, if they have very little exposure to jazz, they have some kind of exposure to Miles Davis' Kind of Blue. And there's a song, the second track, which is called Freddie Freeloader, right? And everybody knows that tune. It's like a 9-minute song, and the idea is just to put on the earphones and, you know, first work on your pad and then get up here and just dig the motion and the movement and the feel. Because what Jimmy Cobb is playing... Sorry?
Just the quarter note pulse.
Just quarter notes, nothing else, okay? So that's very, very basic kind of an idea, okay?
Sure.
Now, this idea can also translate into rock, and I'm going to give you a teaser. Ta-da!
Yeah!
John Bonham, okay? We're going to come back to John Bonham in a second because I want to finish the 4 limbs kind of in a jazz situation. But here's the idea. If you're a rock drummer, hang tight because this same concept will translate over into more of a rock and roll kind of a setting. So let's move to the hi-hat now, and I'm hauling ass. Now the hi-hat, before, if you imagine a rock groove, right? What do we call the heavy hit on 2 and 4?
The backbeat.
The backbeat. And in jazz, you don't have a heavy 2 and 4. What do you have? So what's playing the backbeat in jazz?
Your hi-hat.
Your hi-hat. Yep. And guess what? That's the second most important element after the ride cymbal when you're working on this timekeeping stuff. Now, in order to get that backbeat sense, if you think about the jazz ride pattern, 2 and 4 is like a landing point. Ding, chop, ding, chop, ding, chop. And it functions the same as a backbeat here. Doom, cat, right? So the idea is we've got to get our leg to fall, and so we can really get a nice... Now, if you think about just lifting up your leg and dropping it, a leg is a very heavy thing, right? I mean, I always talk about Tony Soprano and how he would cut up guys. And imagine if you were Tony Soprano and then you had to take the body parts. A leg weighs a hell of a lot. So, you know, they're always like eating pasta at 5 in the morning and exhausted when they have to cut somebody up. So a leg is heavy is the lesson here.
Okay.
Anyway, if you can harness just lifting that leg and letting it truly just fall, you're going to be able to get a beautiful heavy backbeat. And you're going to put it on the back side because you're not forcing it down or rushing it. Now, when you learn jazz, people are like, how do I get these two things to work together, right? Because you're supposed to ding, ding, da, ding here and 2 and 4 here. And so what most people sound like when they learn jazz, this is what their ride and hi-hat sound like. Right? So it's like they never quite connect. And there's no rhyme or reason for getting us there. So, and by the way, this same thing I'm going to show you is valid in playing rock as well. And that is, and I learned this from Freddie Gruber. I studied with Freddie for quite a few years. Probably a lot of your students have heard the name Freddie Gruber. So some of this sort of wisdom and thought process comes from what I learned with him. But the idea is that, and this is what he always said, if you can get something to come up together, then you can get it to come down together, right?
Okay, yeah.
If you want it to come down together, it's got to meet on the way up. So now, if you've spent a lot of time on your throw-up exercise so that you've got it dialed, it's in your muscle memory, and you can just do this without thinking about anything, right?
Yeah.
Well, now, if you can get the hi-hat foot to come up and then let it drop with just basic
Lifting and dropping.
just letting it fall, it'll always fall into the right place. You won't be early, you won't be late because you set it up and then you just let gravity let it fall and use the heaviness of your leg.
Okay.
So people are always wondering sort of how do I, how do I get this to work and getting the music to feel right? Well, this is part of our throwing up, getting it to move forward and feel laid back. Okay, so let's put these two together.
Sure.
And I'm gonna, without talking, I'm gonna start at a medium tempo, and then using this technique, I'm gonna go very fast and then go very slow. And you'll see how, no matter what happens, I can't separate these two.
Okay.
Because I've developed this idea. First of all, this is always locked in, and then no matter what I do, these two are wedded together.
All right,
because
let's
I'm always
see.
letting them come up and come down at the same time. So. See that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So now what we're doing is we're building something foundational, okay? Because to me, everything comes from the idea of pulse. So if we can get pulse locked in on one limb, then we can lock it in on another limb. We understand where it comes from, what it means historically. Now we are going somewhere with our playing. It's not like when you learn to play jazz, get this hand to do this and this foot to do that. That's just making your limbs do stuff. It doesn't mean you're a jazz player.
Okay.
Because in order to be a jazz player, you have to understand where the music comes from and what you should be thinking about and going for with your four limbs. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you guys have questions, get them in. We'll have some time at the end for
Yes,
those.
I'm talking really fast.
You
Now,
got
I'm
lots
just
to
showing
cover,
quickly,
so keep going. Yeah.
I'm showing a picture of Art Blakey on the PowerPoint if you guys want to run up. And Art Blakey, the best way to hear what a hi-hat sounds like in a jazz recording is to listen to Art Blakey records, because Art Blakey had like the loudest hi-hat. And it wasn't because they had a mic on the hi-hat and they turned it up, it's because his hi-hat in the mix was loud, because it was the backbeat. So even today, the hi-hat is always very featured in a jazz mix, and it's because it takes the role of the backbeat. So now let's go to the bass drum. Now, we've talked a little bit about how do you get that, what do you do with a bass drum in jazz? Remember, we're still in jazz land here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to show you a picture of a 1920s band. Now, take a look at this band. The drummer is playing the most enormous bass drum. That bass drum is probably about 40 inches in diameter. It's gymongous. But look at the other instruments: clarinet, trumpet, trombone, piano, and upright bass. I don't know where the upright bass player is. Maybe he's playing one of the other instruments. But
He's taking the photo.
now, this is the 20s. There is no microphones. There is no amplification. The body of the bass is the bass amp, essentially. So how is that drummer going to play that 40-inch drum without blowing away everybody else? And if you
Yeah.
think again about that Count Basie rhythm section, Joe Jones had a 26-inch bass drum there, which was standard for that time period. So the way they did it was they feathered the bass drum. So you probably want to go to the foot cam.
Yeah.
And the idea is that when we strike the bass drum, we want to do the same idea as when we do the throw-up exercise with our hand. In other words, we want to play a full stroke. That sounds like ta instead of ta, okay? Ta, ta. And again, if we want it to lock in with our ride cymbal and to get it to move the right way, to have that forward. And by the way, this technique is called feathering the bass drum, which means, and a trombone player told me this once, he said, he was sitting right in front of me at a gig, and after the gig, he came around and said, "Dude, I love what you were doing with your bass drum. It felt like you were hitting me in the butt with a pillow." And I thought, that's the perfect description of what feathering the bass drum is.
There you go.
And that's the perfect
Perfect.
description
Yeah.
of throw up, because you're feeling it. It's like someone's poking you, hey, 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 hey. But it's also, they're poking you in a soft way, but it's still insistent, right? So feathering the bass drum means, in the balance of these limbs, that's underneath, okay? Now, if you still are on the foot cam, are they on the foot? Go back to the
we
foot
can get
cam.
to that, yeah.
Now, we can line up the foot, the 2 feet, doing their jobs together. So we have this, up, drop, up, drop, up, drop, up, drop, up, drop, up, drop. Okay? Notice I'm playing quietly. If I take now I add the ride. Now let's do all three together.
Okay.
Okay. Now that sounds pretty simple, but everything is locked, and notice the balance of the limbs, right? The kick is underneath. It's the pillow smacking you in the butt.
Yeah.
What's on top and leading? The ride cymbal. It's driving. And the hi-hat is dropping, playing the backbeat, okay?
Love it, yeah.
So when I teach jazz, we got to get these three things happening in this level before we can really go on and start creating a bunch of stuff with our snare drum hand, right? So now let's flash forward and let's now add the full jazz ride pattern, and let's talk about what we're going to do with our snare drum hand.
Okay.
Okay. So now most people, when they go to say study, and this is putting it all together. So basically this groove is now what I'm going to play, which you're seeing on your screen with the PowerPoint.
Okay.
And I call it the Green Onions groove, because you know the Booker T and the MG's song Green Onions?
Yeah.
It's basically nothing but quarter notes.
Yeah.
So, but we're thinking about this in kind of a jazz style setting.
Okay.
And well, so we'll get to the snare drum in a second, but the idea for now with the snare is to make the snare the quietest thing, because people think, oh, the snare, you know, in rock is very loud. In jazz, the snare sits underneath everything else. So now we add a little tap at the snare. Again, by the way, lift and drop as it goes with the ride cymbal. Up, 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 up. Now we have this. Now, notice Dave's head is bobbing.
Totally.
And it drives forward, but it doesn't feel nervous, right? Still feels pretty, I'm nervous, but it doesn't feel nervous. It feels relaxed, pretty chilled out, okay? And if we were to, you know, and that, so let me rewind.
Sure.
When I'm working with students, my goal is to get them to play this Green Onions exercise. And of course, anybody can play that little simple groove that I just showed. That's not hard, but to get it to feel that way, with the limbs balanced the right way, now you're actually doing what comes from our tradition, right?
So you would sit down with your students and just get them to maybe put on the track or use a metronome, just do that exercise over and over again? And
well, I start just with the throw-up exercise on a pad.
That's right. Yeah.
Because that in and of itself can be very, very challenging for a lot of students. And then we gradually add the other elements. And we do a lot of other stuff as well.
Question for you. So if say someone is at home trying this on their own, how are they going to know when it feels good or when it starts to swing or you're able to bob?
Great question. Well, that's part of why you should play along with the track, because it is it's and that's a really good question. So I used to ask Freddie, you know, how do I know when I've got it? Right? How do I know when I'm doing this right? Because it is a little mercurial. It's not just like a groove, and once you get your arms and legs to do stuff, there you go. So the idea is to focus on all this stuff that when I teach it, and just work on, you know, in particular, watching that stick tip and how smoothly is it flying as you do the exercise, and listening to the music and being inside the music. Now, when I teach something, I always say there's a difference between being able to do it and making music, okay? And this is a big thing that a lot of students don't realize. Like, say you're studying with a teacher, and they say, okay, do page 34 this week, and then page 35 next week, and then page 36 the next week. And you get the grooves together on page 34, and you can do them. Great. Does that mean anything? Does that mean you could utilize those grooves on the bandstand? Does that mean that vocabulary is in your playing?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Just learning them and repeating them is only step one.
Yeah.
And it's really about getting it into your muscle memory so deeply. In fact, I'm sure every student has had this experience. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but like when you go and say you got a gig that night and you're learning a tune and there's a fill and you got to get that fill down. And you work on that fill and you work on that fill and then you got it in the practice room. Then you go on the gig that night, and what happens invariably?
Oh, you mess it up.
You blow the fill terribly.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the reason why is you got it that day, but you didn't really get it in here. So you're not making music yet. Making music means that you could do that in your sleep. Freddie used to say, you know, we want to take drumming to the level where it's as easy as breathing or as walking. And I would say, you know, to myself, what do you mean? That's impossible. How can you get it?
Yeah,
but the idea is get it so deep into your bones that you don't have to think about it. Because with pulse, it's got to be there. It can't ever, that idea of this Let me play a more complete groove now, adding a bunch of stuff in more of a jazz situation. Did you ever lose that foot tapping sense of that groove as much as I got out? And that's what you expect when you listen to jazz, right? It's what you expect when you listen to drumming. But I mean, jazz has those kind of crazy elements where we go in and out. The pulse never moved. And the problem is that people want to go ahead and get into really fancy, like this, the thing I'm showing now is a page from the syncopation book on the PowerPoint. And it's the classic page when you go to study drums, and so it's like, okay, get your hands to play this against your ride cymbal pattern. So the first thing everybody does is they sit down and they go. The snare is super loud, and it sounds all staccato. It doesn't. We don't hear that sense of. You have to feel flowing through the whole thing, which is why really it comes back to that throw up exercise.
Totally.
Right? So that's the idea, is that we don't start working on all this stuff until
you got the quarter note down.
Yes,
with that.
until you get the quarter note down and get that green ends exercise, just getting the body feeling that pulse.
Yeah.
So sometimes to get to that place of all four limbs, it can take my students a while.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
And that's a question that we get a lot on Drumeo with our other lessons, so I just wanted to get your perspective on that. We are running low on time, though, so I'll let you finish up this, and we've got some play-alongs that I would like you to do.
Good.
And then some
How much time
too.
do I have? Because I want to talk about rock for
we
just
got
a
about
sec.
20 minutes.
Okay, for the whole...
We'll go a little bit later, obviously,
Okay.
but just don't want to go too much over, so.
No problem. So, 5 more minutes about rock, because I know probably most of the people here are rock players, and they might say, well, I'm glad that you talked about jazz. What about me? I'm a rocker. Well, so let's go back to our buddy John Bonham. We showed a picture of him earlier. Now, take the song When the Levee Breaks, okay? Now, most drummers know that, and when I have my students, I say, okay, play me When the Levee Breaks, or sing me the groove. And what do they sing? Cat, cat. And I say, great. Now let's go back, and I want you to listen to the hi-hat. The hi-hat, but that's just playing eighth notes. But what's happening is when you listen to that, and go home, and when this lesson is done, go listen to that. What you're hearing is this. Okay? Now, he's not going, it wouldn't sound right, the groove wouldn't sound right if you went, it sounds like, insistent hi-hat. Now, when John Bonham in England was growing up in the mid-60s, well, he joined Zeppelin in the mid-60s. When he was a younger man, it's the mid-50s. There was no such thing as a rock drummer. There was no such thing as a rock drum teacher. These guys were all inventing it as they went along. So when John Bonham and Ringo Starr and Charlie Watts and Mitch Mitchell and Bill Ward and Ian Pace were all young men studying, they were learning jazz. They were learning this. And when they went to play rock, they translated that same idea. Notice my stick tip.
Yeah.
That drive, you feel that throw up, that pulse, that poke in the shoulder, that hammer in the butt, okay?
Yeah.
So that's the reason that this stuff translates. Now, same thing, by the way, of your foot dropping with a hi-hat. You can take that and put it in terms of the feet. So let's go to the foot cam for a sec.
Okay.
Now with kick drum, same idea. If are we there?
Yeah.
On the foot cam.
Okay.
There, yeah. So if on the kick drum, I could do the same. I could lift my leg and let it literally fall. Okay. So all I'm doing is lifting it, letting my ankle hang, and then dropping it and letting it just roll back and roll through. Okay. I'm not even striking the drum.
Okay.
Now, I could do the same with my snare drum. So come up top for just a second. I'll go traditional here. I could just lift and let it fall. Actually, I'll do it since most guys play match grip. Just lift, and I can literally let my arm fall onto the drum. I'm not throwing it, I'm just letting it fall. Now, if I put all three of these together, and I've got throw-up exercise here, And then I'm gonna go like this with my feet. And sorry, my kick and snare. So hopefully you're getting me.
Okay.
And 1 and 2, lift, drop, lift, drop, lift, drop, lift, drop. Now that's a pretty nice sounding rock groove,
Big
isn't
time.
it?
Yeah, fat.
It
Nice.
sounds fat,
Yeah.
relaxed, yet it has forward momentum. Holy cow. It's
Go
American
figure.
music.
Yeah.
It's American music. It's something that was invented right here in America. Those guys all listened to people like Earl Palmer, who did that kind of a thing
So
on Little
cool.
Richard records.
Yeah.
And the other early guys that were inventing, say, straight eighth grooves in the late 50s and early 60s. And then by the time you get to guys like John Bonham, they've taken that idea. But when you talk about the physics of creating it, if you use, again, throw up as your anchor, and then you let the other limbs work with that, lift, drop, lift, drop, lift, drop, lift, drop. And I'll actually get a student, and if they could just get this thing going, which isn't that hard, then I literally lift their leg up and I'll lift their arm up. And once they just start letting stuff fall, suddenly their groove magically, like I'm doing less, and suddenly it feels right. It feels like a groove should feel.
So you don't focus too much on the technical side of things. You're just talking about just getting yourself the stick to feel good on the quarter note or the eighth note to have some good bounce to it, and even on your snare and your bass drum too.
And just feeling that.
Yeah.
See, one of the biggest lessons about drumming is that it's about allowing gravity to do the work for you, particularly in rock. Your arms and legs are heavy. And if you can just lift them up and let them fall without adding more downward force, then you could already get a huge sound.
Yeah.
Then we could turn it up and tweak it and twist
Sure,
it to how
of
we
course,
want. But if
yeah.
you could just let it fall, suddenly it's like, oh, I sound like Levon Helm. And all I did was get out of the way and utilize the throw up exercise so that I'm following in the tradition of my forebears in creating this vibe. So that's the lesson. And I
Love
hope,
it. Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit conceptual, but
Well, it is, but it's cool to see how it did evolve. It's cool to see how you explain the quarter note. I like the big takeaway for me is where you're talking about the bass player, how he's doing quarter notes, but he's doing his arm in almost like a circular motion.
Yeah.
And you can translate that to the kit really easy, and it just makes a lot of sense. And you guys have seen a lot of our instructors that we have out here. Watch their ride pattern. Even like Antonio Sanchez, when he are doing the same thing. You just letting the stick hit this cymbal, comes all the way back up. It's got a lot of open flow to it. You do the same thing with everything you play on there. And even talking about how you throw your bass drum down or lifting your leg and throw your leg down, it's great. It's
dropping my leg.
Dropping your leg, sorry.
I'm not throwing anything.
Yeah, throw up is the exercise, but
Right,
dropping your leg.
right.
But also, even when you just played that basic rock groove, you can hear a difference. And I think a lot of drummers out there, they don't get that. And I've been there myself. You play the same pattern. As long as you're playing the same pattern, I thought it was sounding the same as all these other drummers.
That's why you can get 1,000 drummers to sit down and play that pattern, that exact pattern.
Yeah.
And when Steve Gadd sits down and plays that pattern, everybody just goes, oh. I could watch Steve Gadd play that groove all day. I don't know about you.
Easily.
Or Steve Jordan or Levon Helm or any of the groove masters.
Yeah.
And to me, understanding this stuff and the historical where it comes from is the biggest first step. And then we could start adding more stuff. The problem is that drummers always want to add more stuff, which is great. There's nothing wrong with complexity. I'm going to play a song right now that's very complex.
Yeah.
But the point is, if we miss the boat on where we're coming from and what it needs to sound like, again, to quote Freddie Gruber, he used to say, if you don't, how can you know the difference if you don't know the difference? So that's sort of what I've arrived at in doing all this research and just being into older music and playing a lot of older music. It's like, wow, these patterns are really cool and there's a lot going on here.
Yeah.
And of course, with my private students, I work a lot on hand technique. Because again, that's something that when most people learn to play the drums these days, they go to a teacher and the teacher says, okay, hold the sticks. Now, here's how you play, this kind of groove or this kind of style or this song.
Yeah.
We want to get to the sexy stuff, and I don't blame people.
No.
But at the same time, if we have more of a sense of technique and motion and movement and body physics, then it doesn't matter what you play. You can play it great, and it will sound like you. It'll have like this consistency to your playing, and that's what I'm a big fan of.
I love it.
The big picture.
Well, let's get you to play that song. This next tune that you are going to play, it's called On the Verge, I
On the
believe.
verge, and I am on the verge of maybe getting it down.
Okay, well, here we go.
I should say this is I want to do a shout out. This is a song I wrote on a jazz trio record I put out in 2003.
Okay.
That was a vibraphone, bass, and drums trio called the Daniel Glass Trio. And A friend of mine in LA is a great arranger, a guy named Tim Davies, and I guested with his big band. He had a big band, and he took this tune, this trio tune, and arranged it for a big band. Earlier this year, I played this song as part of the PAS Day of Percussion at Millersville, Pennsylvania. It was for the Pennsylvania PAS chapter. And I played it with the Millersville Big Band. So this is me with the Millersville Big Band playing a big band version of my tune on the Verge.
Whoa, that's pretty cool.
Which is in 3. And wish me luck, because it's the first time I'm doing it live, really.
Oh, you'll do fine. And if you guys have questions for
track.
Daniel, get them in now while he plays this tune, and we'll get to them right after this. Bravo. I was hearing the melody in my head for the whole last part too. It was awesome, man. Good job.
I know that little riff. It's just, that thing gets really stuck in my head, and and I just want to play along with it all day long. And so.
I love watching guys like you when you can interpret that melody on the drums and you can still hear it going on in your head. You know, that takes a lot of skill. All right, let's get to some questions.
All right,
you ready
good.
for this? We don't have too many, but and we'll get through as many as we can, guys. First off, from Goffa, Tim Goffa says, just tell him hi from everyone at Stickman. Tim was at Stickman, so he just wants to say hello.
Yay, Canadians. Yay, Regina.
Yeah. That was, a couple months back you did that?
I did.
Yeah.
In July.
That's right.
There was the Stickman Drum Experience, which was outside Saskatoon. And was it last year? I did the Regina Drum Festival.
Very cool.
I think. I don't remember when it was, but it was cool. It was great.
They all
great.
blend together, right?
Yeah.
572 Heaven says, great lesson indeed. This might be off topic, but here it goes. I'm a big Maynard Ferguson fan, thanks to my dad. My question is, why did Maynard's band always make big band classics swing so well and sound so great, if you have any ideas?
Well, it's funny because I just went and looked at a bunch of old Maynard Ferguson clips. You know, you get on a thing on YouTube, all of us do it.
Yeah.
Peter Erskine played with Maynard Ferguson. Greg Bissonette played with Maynard Ferguson. So, you know, was cool because there was a lot of big bands that went, not a lot, a select few lasted into, say, the 60s, 70s, and the 80s. And, you know, Buddy Rich, of course, his great band, and Maynard Ferguson was another great big band leader. And they understood the old way of swinging, but they were dedicated to bringing a lot of new material into the repertoire. So Maynard especially, he played a lot of, like, you know, funk and rock and disco stuff. He had a huge hit with the theme from Rocky. Gonna fly now, you know, real groovy kind of 70s version.
Yeah.
There's a killer YouTube clip of Peter Erskine playing on that.
Oh, really?
It's amazing. Yeah,
wow, okay.
It's really cool. So yeah, check it out. But that's my best guess.
Okay, cool. All right, 1 second here. This one here is from Bowman1966. He says, hey, Dan, this is your old classmate. Okay, he says,
wow.
Yeah, so he says he knows you from school. He says, my son is interested in playing drums, but wasn't able to get the drums in band at school, sorry. Any recommendations for, I guess, you know what, if you want, he's asking for a recommendation for an instructor in Texas area. Email us at david@drumeo.com, or you can email, I'll pass it on to you there. This one's from Justin Cruel. He says, do you have a short explanation of where and how fusion came about, and where is the pulse in it? Thanks. He says, nice lesson, has given me a lot to consider in my playing.
Far out. Thank you. Well, fusion, a lot of people credit Miles Davis with the invention of fusion because Miles came from a traditional swing and jazz background. But when styles like funk and rock and roll became popular in the, you know, starting in the 60s and moving into the late 60s, Miles was one of the first jazz guys to really actively integrate those styles of music into what he was doing. And it was very revolutionary for its time because everybody associated with Miles as a bebopper, you know, or a swing guy.
Yeah.
And suddenly he's coming out with all these great musicians like Joe Zawinul, who invented Weather Report, Wayne Shorter, who co-founded Weather Report with Joe Zawinul, Jack DeJohnette, Chick Corea, Keith Jarrett. You know, he found these great young players who knew the new stuff but could swing in the old way. And so the word fusion literally comes from, you know, the idea of combining jazz and rock, or jazz and you know, jazz with other styles.
Sure.
That's really where it came from. And then it grew from there. But if you, Bitches Brew is sort of like, a lot of people say that's sort of ground zero of fusion.
Okay.
And it's pretty out record, but it's amazing. It's amazing.
Cool.
So yeah.
And this is just, by the way, guys, this is just a snippet of what Daniel usually teaches. He does a lot of evolution of, well, the history, I guess you can say, more of the history. So you've got to go check out his DVD. And again, you can buy that on his website.
Actually, in that, in that suitcase, in the plastic bag, maybe I'm answering the next question, you can grab it, are the DVDs. I can show them on the screen.
Sure, yeah. It's in which one here? This one here?
Yeah. Yeah, that's it.
My head almost came off with my ears there, but you can take that out. I'll ask the next question.
His head exploded.
This one's from Al, and he says, how did you react when your drum teacher set up the drums in the left-handed setup?
Well, I didn't actually, I made the decision on my own how I became a left-hander. And it's funny because like I was telling you, I'm gonna write a big blog post or do a podcast about the left-handed drummer, because people are always really interested in it, and it makes sense. But I was a left-hander. I do everything left-handed. I was a left-hander through and through as a kid, obviously as an adult. And when I was young, my best friend turned me on to Deep Purple's Made in Japan, right? Famous live album from 1972. One of the greatest live albums, rock live albums ever made, I might add. But Ian Pace, the drummer for Deep Purple, is a left-handed drummer, and I noticed on the cover of the record that his drums were set up differently than all the other drummers that I'd seen. And I figured, oh, he must be left-handed. So when I got my first drum set, or even when I started fooling around on drum sets before I got one, I sort of tried them out in different ways without really even knowing what was what. Yeah. And I just decided that this way was more comfortable for me. And then when I went to study drum set, I told the teacher, I'm a left-handed drummer. And then, of course, what did he do? He bitched and moaned about having to turn his drums around, and that's the story of my life. So kids, if you're going to decide to become a left-handed drummer, it's great, fly your flag, but be prepared. Be prepared. That the rest of society may not go with you on that so much.
Okay, well, we'll show the DVDs at the very end, but a couple more questions here first. This one's from Jay Drumeo. He says, which size sticks are you using? He says, when I play jazz or jazz grooves, I have a tendency to use 7As or 5As. Should I use a stick that's comfortable or required by the style?
Very good. I would say both. What a drumstick can do for you is make your life easier, whatever the style of music is that you're playing. So I would say 7As or 5As are both totally appropriate for jazz. I've recently started using the Jojo Mayer sticks.
Oh, cool.
And I don't use them for everything. For example, in New York City, I play a lot of very, very quiet gigs backing singers. I do a lot of that, and there's a huge kind of cabaret scene, and a lot of Broadway stars will go do their own gigs. And I've fallen into that world, which is great. I work with a lot of great musicians, and you really have to take burning at a super low level to an art form, which, as most drummers know, is not easy to do, right? Because what are the two things that drummers are scared of most? Playing slowly and playing softly. Yeah. And so this is both. Yeah. But it's even harder to play softly and really play fast and burn. So when I play those kind of gigs, I use the SD4 combos, Vic Firth. I'm a Vic Firth endorser. Obviously, this stuff was much harder hitting, these last two tunes I did in this lesson. And I either use 5As or I use the JoJo sticks, which I've just recently gotten into, and I'm liking them, particularly for that fusion stuff, where you have to play with technical facility, so the stick needs to be small enough you can get it to do a lot of stuff, and but not so heavy that you can't get around the kit.
Totally.
But not so light that you can't play with fire.
So there you go. It's a bit of an open-ended answer, but that makes sense. Yeah, play with what's comfortable and also suits the style.
Definitely. And what's so great is there are so many sticks out there now. You can try out a million different things.
Totally. And there's a ton of artist sticks you can try.
And I, by the way, I switch out my sticks for every single gig that I do. It's always open. I always am like, what am I going to use now? So there's no hard and fast rules, because I do so many different kinds of gigs.
Absolutely, right? This one's from Christopher Rees. He says, how long have you been endorsed by Aquarian drumheads, and how do you like them?
Great question, and I'm glad that you brought that up. I have been an Aquarian endorser for over 20 years. Whoa. I started in '94, and the thing that drew me to Aquarian right off the bat, Roy Burns, the founder of Aquarian, is a classic drummer. He's one of the last few of the Mohicans of guys that was an amazing player. Played with Benny Goodman in the 50s and on up, and he was one of our great educators. And I've always loved and admired Roy. He was a hero of mine growing up. Cool. And he started Aquarian in the 80s. And when I had moved to Los Angeles and was getting my act together, and I joined Royal Crown Revue, I found out that Aquarian had what are called modern vintage heads. And they were sort of designed to be like calfskins. So to have the same kind of thickness and sort of warm, full, round kind of sound. Not necessarily like super attack oriented, but more like, I like to say, tubby and really full. So for the music that I was doing with Royal Crown Revue, which was in, sort of very vintage kind of a sound, I just got some and started using them, and I fell in love with them. And then I started meeting Roy at the NAMM shows, and so my relationship with Aquarian grew. And what's really great, just a couple years ago now, Aquarian has released some new vintage heads. And by the way, these sound amazing with brushes too. So for jazz playing, they really sound like a calf skin, as close as you're going to get to a real calf skin, which sound incredible on brushes because it's a very uneven surface. Unlike synthetic heads that have such a perfect surface.
That's right. Yeah.
But now Aquarian has released what's called the Modern Vintage 2s, which is a 2-ply version of the Modern Vintage, and the Deep Vintage, which is a thicker ply. And a lot of rock guys suddenly have discovered these heads and are using them. And the other thing I'll say about them is that they are insanely durable. Yeah. So I took these out with me on the road with Brian Setzer for a 6-week tour, and I kept asking my tech, like, when are you guys going to change the heads? Because the sound guy, who's Tom Petty's sound guy, he was the one who would be like, okay, you need to change the heads. And I kept saying, when are you going to change the heads? He's like, no, he loves them. Wow. So we changed the heads, I think, twice on a 6-week tour.
You're wailing on those gigs there. Yeah.
I'm wailing. And I was playing with Setzer, I was wailing a lot harder than this with bigger sticks.
Wow.
So, they're really durable, and that's
they sound great, and they have a cool look to them. I mean, obviously they're different off-white than the snare head there, so you can see on the overhead, but they sound awesome.
They're amazing.
Nick says, tell Daniel, hey, from Nick at Drummer's Resource. He's here watching. So
yeah, Nick.
Good to see you out, Nick, and I'm sure we'll be chatting real soon.
And I'm going to be doing some projects with Drummer's Resource, and it's a great. If people don't know about it, it's an amazing drum website, and he does a lot of podcasts of interviews with legendary drummers. So cool. check it out for sure.
Absolutely. Well, we'll wrap it up there for questions because we are already 10 minutes over. But let's talk about your DVDs here quickly. You want to just show them to everyone?
So very quickly. These two come as a pair. You don't have to get them as a pair, but they work well together. This is the Century Project, which is, it looks at 100 years of American music evolution through the eyes of the drummer. And it really tells the story of the music and the evolution and the story of the drum set and why we play it the way that we do. So it goes from 1865, the end of the Civil War, up to 1965 and the British invasion. And it will blow your mind if you haven't seen it. That's all I got to say. Because a lot of people, it won the Drumeo and the Modern Drummer Award and all that stuff. It's a totally different look at drums, and will give you a lot of backstory. That'll, again, make you a better player today. And that's a big thing that I talk about is why learning these classic grooves makes you a better player today. This DVD, in this DVD, there are 11 different vintage drum kits that I use and display. And in this DVD, I sit down with John Aldridge. The DVD is called Traps, The Incredible Story of Vintage Drums. And I sit down with a guy named John Aldridge, who is one of the world's gurus of vintage drums. And he and I take those 11 drum sets and we break them down and get really, really deep with the whole
very cool.
The whole story of vintage drums. Every kind of, badges, finishes, hoops, sticks, brushes, you name it, we get into vintage gear. So if you're into vintage gear, you want to learn more about it, then this DVD is worth checking out. And the two together are 7 hours of material, over 600 old photos and 8x10s and catalog shots, old catalog stuff. So there's a ton here.
Very cool.
It's sort of
unique,
it's like Ken Burns meets a drum clinic meets a coffee table book. That's what I like to say. Yeah. And then the newest DVD, this one here, is called From Ragtime to Rock. Okay. And it also looks at the same 100 years of American music, but it looks at it from a more broad perspective. So it's not just a drum-oriented thing. And the reason I designed this is that there's nothing like this out there for school teachers. So if you happen to be a school teacher or you know a school teacher, particularly like junior high or high school, general music. This is starting to be used by more and more of those kind of teachers, and so it's a really great overview.
Nice.
Again, it's kind of like a documentary with performances, and it really analyzes how the music evolved, kind of like what we're talking about today.
Very cool.
Those are the DVDs, and there's books and stuff too on my website. I got 5 books.
Check them out online, guys. DanielGlass.com. Thank you so much.
Thank
Daniel,
you, brother.
Here,
Been great to be here at Drumeo. Yeah. Super excited. We're gonna shoot some. We're gonna shoot a course.
We're
tomorrow.
gonna do a course for all Edge members. We're gonna shoot a course with Daniel on shuffle beats and all. That's gonna be really cool.
That's right. So another reason to join. Become a member.
Absolutely. And if you guys want a free trial of Drumeo, to check it out, drumeo.com/trial. Get a free 30 days. Again, thank you all for coming out. Thanks for the sponsors: DW, Sabian, Crescent, Aquarian, Remo, LP Percussion, and head stick
Armor
bags.
cases.
Armor
Very
cases.
good.
I'm
impressed.
Of course, again, thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
So you're going to play us out with the track, and now this track is called Hey Pachuco.
Hey Pachuco, yes.
Hey Pachuco, okay.
This is, I guess we're playing it. They started the click. Just a quick, my band Royal Crown Revue this is an original of that band.
Okay.
Same band that we did Viva Las Vegas with. And this song was featured in the movie The Mask.
Nice.
The Jim Carrey the movie.
Yes.
And so most people know that
You might
song, the
recognize
big
this
famous
too.
swing dance scene, and it's a really nice drum feature. So
Okay, well, I'm going to get out, so I'm not in the shot here. You have fun playing this tune. Thank you, guys, and I'll
will.
see you all later.
all right.
Cheers.